Hi, I'm Sarah Miller. I'm 34 and work as a financial advisor in Boston. Yeah, I know life's little irony, right? I've spent my whole adult life being the responsible one. The one who saves, plans, makes smart decisions. Meanwhile, my younger brother Michael? He got the love, the attention, and pretty much all the help emotionally and financially. For years, I quietly paid my parents' mortgage. Even after my dad refinanced their fully paid-off home just to fund yet another one of Michael's business flops. I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I just kept showing up being the daughter who fixes things. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. When I found out they left everything to Michael in there, I froze. Not a single thing to me. After everything I had done. It wasn't anger that hit me first, it was a kind of silence. A heavy silence. And I decided I was done. So I stopped making those monthly payments. Quietly. No big announcement. No drama. About a month later, my mom sent me this frantic text panicking about the mortgage being due. And for the first time, I didn't fold. I took a breath and I finally responded.
Calm, clear, strong.
But before I share exactly what I said and how things played out, take a second, drop in the comments where you're tuning in from. Hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself, especially when it hurt. And subscribe because trust me, there's more where this came from. More stories about what it really looks like to choose yourself. See, I grew up in a quiet little town in Massachusetts during the 90s. You know, the type: white picket fence, freshly mowed lawn, the kind of house that looked picture perfect from the outside. But inside, the truth wasn't as neat. Because when you're the kid who always gets overlooked, it doesn't matter how tidy the garden is. You carry that imbalance with you. And for me, that imbalance had a name: Michael. My brother's 3 years younger than me, but growing up, you'd think he was royalty. He was the golden child, as they say. Anytime I questioned why he got the new sports gear while I was stuck with secondhand stuff, my dad would just brush it off with, "Boys need more support to succeed in this world." That was his go-to answer for everything. My dad owned a small construction business, not flashy, but solid. It gave us a pretty comfortable life. My mom didn't work outside the home. Instead, she poured all her energy into Michael. His schoolwork, his hobbies, his everything.
Me?
I was more the quiet achiever. I had this natural thing with numbers, they just made sense to me. They felt fair, reliable, unlike the way things worked in our house. Emotions, attention, praise, those didn't follow any logic I could ever figure out. By the time I was in 3rd grade, I was already managing my allowance in a notebook, planning weeks ahead for things I wanted to buy. Michael, on the other hand, got random gifts just because he existed, it seemed. And that pattern? It didn't stop. All through high school, I kept a 4.0 GPA, served as class treasurer, and even worked part-time at a local accounting firm. Meanwhile, Michael floated by with average grades and a few baseball trophies. But somehow, his wins always seemed more celebrated. Mine felt like checkboxes on a list no one really cared about. College? That was the first time I felt like maybe I could finally step out of that shadow. I got my first real taste of independence the day I landed a major scholarship to study finance at Boston University. I was so proud, it felt like everything I had worked for was finally paying off. But instead of celebrating with me, my parents said something I'll never forget. "It's good you got that scholarship, we need to save for Michael's education." That stung. And just like they planned, 3 years later, when Michael got into a private business school, they paid for everything. His tuition, his fancy apartment, the whole package without blinking. Meanwhile, I was juggling classes and working multiple jobs just to make up the difference my scholarship didn't cover. But those college years? They changed me. That's when I started becoming emotionally independent, too. I found friends who saw my mind, who appreciated me for who I was, not just for what I could do for them. For the first time, I felt seen. After graduation, I landed an entry-level job at a well-known investment firm in Boston. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. I was finally doing work that matched my passion, and people noticed. My clients trusted me. My team respected me. And Michael? When he graduated, you'd think he cured cancer. My parents threw this over-the-top graduation party like he'd just changed the world. Even though my parents barely contributed to my education, I still stayed close to them. I called every week, visited almost every month, and kept telling myself family isn't about keeping score. The first time they asked me for money, it was right after I got promoted to junior advisor. Just a small loan. They said they were behind on property taxes. I didn't even think twice. I wanted to help. I wanted to show them I was doing well, that I was dependable. But that one small favor turned into something bigger. What started as a simple ask became a pattern, a slow, steady stream of temporary help that never really ended. While I was grinding in Boston's fast-paced financial world, trying to build a name for myself, I finally managed to buy my own place, a cozy little condo in Cambridge. It was a big deal for me. I'd saved for years, invested smartly, and made it happen. And yet my parents barely reacted. No big congratulations, no proud words. But when Michael, my younger brother, announced he was opening a sporting goods store with his friends, you'd think he won the lottery. And when that business flopped, which it did, in less than a year and a half, thanks to poor planning and spending money like it was endless, my parents didn't say a word about it being his mistake. They cashed out their entire retirement savings just to bail him out of his latest mess. And watching it all unfold left me stuck in this tug of war with myself. The financial advisor in me knew how reckless it all was, like every red flag screaming in my face. But the daughter in me? She was still trying to be the good one, the supportive one, the one who held it all together. That inner conflict quietly shaped the way I lived my adult life. From the outside, everything looked polished and successful. But underneath, I was carrying the weight of a family that never quite learned how to stop leaning on me. Then came my 30th birthday, a big milestone. Not just personally, but professionally too. I'd just been promoted to senior financial advisor at Wellington Barnes, one of the top wealth management firms in Boston. My client list was growing fast, and I'd earned a solid reputation for staying sharp even when the markets got messy. For the first time in a long time, I felt financially secure, like I could finally breathe. But life has a way of testing your peace. Right around that same time, my dad had his first serious health scare. His blood pressure was through the roof, and his heart wasn't doing much better. There were so many doctor visits and specialists, and I was right there for all of it. Meanwhile, Michael, yes, my brother, was chasing another big dream. This time it was a high-end restaurant. Fancy branding, big ideas, and of course it needed a lot of funding. Guess who he came to?
Even though I gently tried to warn them, just a quiet heads up that this might not be the best timing, because of Dad's health, my parents were all in on Michael's latest business idea. They truly believed him when he said this restaurant would eventually take care of them in retirement. Then one rainy Tuesday, while I was going over a client's portfolio, my phone buzzed. It was Mom asking oddly specific questions about second mortgages and interest rates. My gut dropped. The way she was talking, I knew something was off. So I gently but firmly pressed for more details. And sure enough, I found out they had taken out a massive mortgage on our family home. A home that had already been fully paid off. All to give Michael the startup money he needed. When I looked deeper, it was worse than I imagined. The loan had terrible terms, payments that would follow them well into their 80s. I offered to help, to look over the paperwork, and maybe even use my connections to get them a better deal. But Dad, in his usual way, brushed me off with a quick, "We know what we're doing, Sarah," and shut down the conversation. 6 months later, it all came crashing down. Dad had a heart attack while checking on the renovations at Michael's restaurant. The hospital stays, the treatments, the medications, it all piled up fast, both emotionally and financially. The bills just kept coming. The insurance didn't cover everything again. And then, just like clockwork, my phone lit up. It was Mom, her voice laced with that familiar worry. This time, she asked if I could help out with some of Dad's medical bills just temporarily, she said. I didn't even pause. Of course I helped. Over the next year, I ended up covering almost $30,000 in healthcare costs. I told myself it was okay, I had a good income, and it didn't feel like a huge sacrifice at the time. I wanted to believe I was just being a good daughter. During Dad's recovery, my parents were sincerely grateful, but even in their thank yous, the conversation always found its way back to Michael, how his restaurant was struggling, how the odds were stacked against him, how scared they were about his future. And that was the season I met Thomas. He was a quiet, kind architectural engineer I got introduced to through a client. Unlike any guy I'd dated before, Thomas didn't just nod along when I talked about my family, he actually listened. He asked questions. Real questions. Why do you keep helping them when they clearly prioritize Michael every time? He asked one night gently. I didn't have a deep answer. I just said, they're still my parents. It became my go-to line. But his words stayed with me, like little seeds planted in the back of my mind. I wasn't ready to face them yet, but they were there, quietly growing. Eventually, Dad's condition stabilized a new normal filled with prescriptions and limitations. Meanwhile, Michael's restaurant slowly crumbled right on cue. First, he blamed the location. Then the staff. Then it was the neighborhood. There was always some excuse. But here's what I couldn't ignore. While the restaurant struggled, Michael was still living in a high-end apartment, driving a flashy new sports car, and posting weekend getaways from beach resorts. And somehow, our parents were still bending over backwards to help him. Every family get-together felt scripted. Michael's business troubles took center stage. Everyone fussed over him, while my recent promotion managing director of $1 billion portfolio got a quick, "That's nice," before the conversation circled back to Michael. I tried to keep the resentment in check. I really did. I never brought it up to my parents, only to Thomas, in quiet moments when the weight of it all got too heavy to keep inside. Then the moment came that changed everything. One evening, in a casual chat, Mom slipped up and mentioned they were 3 months behind on their mortgage. My heart sank. I knew exactly what had happened. They'd helped Michael again, this time to pay off restaurant suppliers, and now they were drowning. I didn't say a word. No lectures, no arguments. I just logged into my bank account and set up an automatic payment to cover their mortgage every month. That was the moment I stopped pretending everything was okay. I kept telling myself it was just a temporary thing, that helping out financially was about protecting my parents' future, not another rescue mission for Michael's poor choices. But that temporary help quietly stretched into almost 2 years. And somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like support and started feeling like an expectation. No one ever said thank you anymore. It was just assumed. Meanwhile, Michael kept doing what he always did, spending recklessly, chasing another big idea. And my parents? They kept backing him like always. No boundaries. No accountability. Then came the winter I turned 33 and everything changed. A routine blood test turned into something far more serious. Dad was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. It had already spread. No surgery. No real treatment options. Just a brutal prognosis. 6 months. That news hit us like a wrecking ball. Everything else faded. We were suddenly living in this sharp, surreal awareness of time running out. During one of my hospital visits, the kind where you're mostly just sitting there, watching machines beep, Dad turned to me and said something I'll never forget. He was looking out at the Boston skyline, quiet for a while, and then he said, "You've always been the responsible one, Sarah. I see how much you've done for this family." It was like hearing water in the middle of a desert. After so many years of being overlooked, those words were the first time I felt truly seen. Like maybe I wasn't invisible after all. As Dad got weaker, we had to start talking about the hard stuff: the house, the inheritance, what would happen next. I had been the one managing their finances for years, so in my mind, it made sense that things would be split fairly. I figured maybe Michael would keep the house, he was really attached to it, and I'd receive an equal share from the other assets. That felt balanced. And during those final months, I stepped up even more. I paid the mortgage. I covered upgrades to make the house safer for Dad, things like handrails and ramps. I hired in-home nurses for round-the-clock care when insurance didn't come through. Every little thing that would make his last days easier, I took care of it. Quietly. Without keeping a tally. But looking back, it added up. Over $60,000 in just 4 months straight from my personal savings, because I didn't want to touch my investments during a shaky market. In those final weeks, we all came together in the house. There was beauty in the closeness, even with all the pain. Michael even moved back home for a bit, though he mostly offered emotional support. He wasn't really involved in the day-to-day care or the financial side of things. Then one evening, one of those rare, Quiet moments that feel heavy with meaning Dad asked to speak with me alone. He took my hand and held it tighter than I expected, given how frail he'd become. And he looked me in the eye and said, "You're going to be just fine, Sarah." He looked at me, his voice scratchy from all the meds, and whispered, "I always knew you'd do well at anything you set your mind to." He didn't bring up anything about the will or inheritance, not directly. But in that moment, it felt like some kind of quiet acknowledgement. Like he was finally seeing all the years I'd shown up, held things together without ever needing to be asked. When he passed, it was just understood that I'd handle everything. I picked the casket deep mahogany, the kind I knew he would have liked. I organized the memorial, which honestly, brought out way more people than I expected. Neighbors, old friends, co-workers, they all came. I paid for it all. Quietly. Not because I was trying to prove anything, but because it felt like the last thing I could do for him. Like a final, private promise I was keeping as his daughter. Then came the will reading. We met at this old school attorney's office. You know the type, dark wood walls, heavy leather chairs. Everything about it screamed money and tradition. Michael, my brother, showed up late, like 20 minutes late. Blamed traffic, barely looking up from his phone until the meeting actually started. At first, it was all just legal talk that kind of blurred together. But when the lawyer started listing the assets, something in me tensed. Then I heard it. To my son Michael Miller, I leave the family home at 47, Oakwood Drive, all furnishings, personal belongings, full ownership of Miller Construction Company, all accounts, investments, insurance policies. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I literally couldn't hear the rest. Everything inside me just went still. Then it came. To my daughter, Sarah Miller, I leave my collection of first edition history books, my grandfather's pocket watch, and my blessing for continued success in her already established career. That was it. No house. No money. No business. Nothing else. Just some old books, a watch, and a blessing. Even the attorney looked uncomfortable. I could tell he felt the weight of it, this massive, obvious imbalance, but he couldn't say anything. Just asked if I had any questions about the specific personal items I'd been left. Michael? Oh, he was practically smirking. And Mom? She wouldn't even look at me. Eyes glued to her hands, folded tightly in her lap the entire time. I held it together. At least on the outside. But inside something just cracked. Like every belief I'd carried about fairness, about family showing up for each other, it all shattered right then. The drive home was a blur. And when I finally stepped inside my apartment, the tears came fast and hard. Thomas had made dinner. He didn't say anything at first, just wrapped his arms around me. And when I finally told him what happened, he got angry for me. Not performative, not over the top, just that kind of fierce, steady anger that says, "You didn't deserve this." Later, my cousin Jen told me what the family had been saying behind my back. She doesn't need the money. She's already successful. Like that was the justification. Like success means you're not allowed to be treated fairly. Like being strong means you don't need love. Or consideration. Or equity. The day after the will was read, I got a call. After hearing everyone else's side of the story, my parents told the rest of the family that Michael deserved the inheritance. That his business struggles weren't really his fault, and besides, he needed the financial security, unlike me. Because apparently, I already had mine. In that moment, everything that had always felt a little off suddenly made perfect sense. All those years of being dependable, of achieving and succeeding, it wasn't respected. It was used. My stability had become their excuse. Not something to celebrate, but something to exploit. The weeks after the will reading blurred together. I was grieving, but also completely shaken by how easily I'd been betrayed. Outwardly, I kept it together, still showing up to work, still wearing the professional smile. But behind closed doors? I cried. A lot. Or just sat there, silent, feeling completely hollow. And even after the inheritance blow, I kept making the mortgage payments like nothing changed. I told myself it was my way of honoring Dad's memory, not feeding into more of Michael's financial mess. But Michael didn't waste a single second. He moved straight into the family home. Slid right into the master bedroom like he'd always belonged there. Mom quietly shifted into the guest room without even raising an eyebrow. The whole thing felt symbolic, like one last reminder of how things always were in our family. Michael center stage. Me quietly holding everything up from the wings. I was still the one covering the bills. Still paying for a home I no longer stepped foot in. A home where Michael now lived rent-free. The irony of it didn't escape me. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was up late again going over my monthly expenses trying to make sense of things. That's when Mom called. She had a list read out like a grocery receipt. The water heater had broken. A few windows were rotting and the kitchen appliances were just embarrassing now. Altogether, it would cost about $12,000 to fix everything. And it was pretty clear she expected me to pay for it. When I asked gently if Michael was going to help cover anything, she paused, surprised. Like the idea hadn't even crossed her mind. He's still getting the restaurant stuff sorted, she said quickly. But I already knew the truth. My contacts had told me weeks ago that Michael had filed for bankruptcy. The restaurant was gone. The debts weren't. And my gut feeling that he wasn't putting a single dollar into that house was confirmed when he showed up to dinner in a brand new luxury SUV. Smiling ear to ear, showing off all the fancy features and expensive upgrades. Mom looked proud, almost like she was the one behind the wheel. Meanwhile, she couldn't even afford a new water heater. That moment hit me hard. The mismatch between what he was spending and what she was asking from me, it was so painfully clear. And for the first time, I couldn't push it aside. That's when Thomas gently, lovingly suggested I talk to someone. Maybe therapy could help me unpack the grief and everything else tangled up inside it. So I started seeing Dr. Marquez. Soft-spoken, warm, and kind. And honestly, those sessions became the first space where I didn't feel crazy for questioning how my family worked, or how little space there had ever been for me. She looked at me gently during our third session and said something that stopped me cold. You're grieving more than just your father. You're mourning the version of him you wished existed, and the belief that life, or family, would always be fair. And she was right. Her words gave me a way to understand it all, but they didn't make it hurt any less. Meanwhile, my bank account kept shrinking. The mortgage I'd been covering for my parents came out like clockwork. On top of that, Mom started asking for money again, this time for house renovations. But let's be honest, most of those changes were really for Michael's comfort. And me? I was running on empty, emotionally drained, tired. Eventually, my work started slipping. I missed a few key things on an investment plan, which led to a tough but kind conversation with the senior partners at my firm. Thomas, one of them, pulled me aside and said, "You need a break. 2 weeks. Go somewhere far. Let your mind breathe." At first I rolled my eyes. A vacation felt like running away. But later that night it hit me, maybe space was exactly what I needed to see everything clearly. So I went. Barcelona's wild architecture. The blue domes of Santorini. The quiet power of Rome's ancient streets. For the first time in years, I felt still. Away from the chaos, the noise, the guilt. And then one night, sitting on a hotel balcony overlooking the Amalfi Coast, a glass of wine in hand, I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't let myself do before. I added it all up. Just the mortgage payments I'd made over the years. $42,000. And that didn't even include the medical bills, the house repairs, or the dozens of small things I paid for without thinking. Seeing that number in front of me, it hit different. The resentment I had carried quietly for years suddenly had shape. It wasn't just hurt feelings, it was a pattern. A long history of being the one who steps in, pays up, and gets nothing back but silence and expectation. When I got back to Boston, I put it all in a spreadsheet. 5 years of financial support added up to more than some people's entire retirement savings. It could have been a down payment on a vacation home. Could have been mine. I took it to Victoria, my mentor, my rock, and the first woman to ever make partner at our firm. Over lunch, I showed her everything. She looked at me and said, "When it comes to money and family, things get messy. That's why boundaries exist. They don't make you cold, they keep you clear." Her advice wasn't just coming from experience. It came from living it, decades of helping families navigate messy, emotional money situations. And she was right. No matter how uncomfortable it felt, I had to draw the line. Not to hurt anyone, but to finally stop hurting myself. One evening, after a long talk with Thomas and a lot of soul-searching, I finally logged into my bank account and hit cancel, on the mortgage payment that was supposed to go out the next week. It only took a few seconds, but that tiny click felt massive, like I was finally taking back a piece of myself after years of silently going along with family expectations that never really felt fair. Honestly, I didn't expect the wave of anxiety that hit me right after. It felt like I had broken some sacred rule, not by doing anything wrong, but just by stopping something I had been voluntarily doing for way too long. Thomas held me that night when the panic hit. I couldn't stop shaking. He kept reminding me, gently but firmly, that doing the right thing, setting a boundary, shouldn't feel like a betrayal. And that if it did, maybe that said more about how I'd been conditioned than about the choice itself. He was right. My sense of normal had been completely twisted by years of emotional manipulation from people I loved. So I got ready for the storm I knew was coming. I started prepping possible replies in case of drama, whether it was guilt trips, passive-aggressive texts, or full-on shouting matches. I promised myself I'd stay calm and kind but firm no matter what. Then came the silence. 32 days of it. No one said a word. It was weirdly peaceful and also nerve-wracking. But in that quiet, I kept going to therapy, leaning on Thomas, and confiding in a few close friends who got it. Every day made me feel just a little stronger in my decision. And then, right on cue, the message came. It hit my phone minutes after the payment would have usually gone through. Mortgage due. Your payment didn't go through. Please fix ASAP. The double exclamation marks. The rushed, almost panicked tone. Like it was just a given I'd come in and clean up the mess like I'd always done. But this time I didn't panic. My hands were steady as I typed back the message I had spent weeks carefully crafting, rewriting, and rereading. I've decided to stop making mortgage payments on a house that legally belongs to Michael, who's been living there rent-free. So there I was, driving this brand new luxury car, but feeling anything but rich. I had been quietly supporting my family for years, paying bills, covering emergencies, showing up every single time, and yet, not once did I feel truly seen, let alone appreciated. And now, after being completely left out of the inheritance, that was the moment I knew something had to change. I finally drew the line. I said, I love you, but I can't keep carrying this burden alone. I can't keep enabling choices that just aren't responsible. I stared at my phone after sending that message to Mom. For about 20 minutes, all I saw were those little dots typing, then gone, typing again. And finally her reply came in. How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you? We could lose our home. Not one word about how I was feeling. Not even a pause to consider what I'd been through. Just a complete focus on what this meant for them. And in that moment, everything Dr. Marquez had been helping me unpack finally clicked. I wasn't really seen as a daughter. I was the provider. That was my assigned role. And apparently, it came without the respect or care that should have gone with it. What followed was an avalanche of texts. Guilt trips about all the sacrifices they made when I was little. Subtle jabs wrapped in emotional blackmail. And finally, the classic bomb. Your father would be so disappointed in you. That line? That was meant to break me. And they knew it. Then came Michael. Right on cue. He didn't text. He called and I let it go straight to voicemail. His message. 5 long minutes of yelling, blaming, and guilt-tripping, then flipping to, but we're family. You owe us. At one point he even said, you've always been jealous of me. That line hit different, not because it was true, but because he finally admitted what had been unspoken all along. He knew he was the favorite. I didn't respond with anger. I didn't match their chaos. I took a deep breath and wrote a calm, clear email. I addressed it to both Mom and Michael, and I attached something they could no longer ignore. A spreadsheet. In the last 5 years alone, I've covered $127,340 of family expenses, mortgage payments, medical bills, house repairs, random emergencies, all of it. And I made one thing crystal clear. I care about this family. I always have. But I can't keep paying for a house that legally belongs to Michael, especially when he hasn't contributed anything to maintain it. I told them I'm open to rebuilding things, but only if we can do it in a way that's fair, not just familiar. A week later, the mortgage company sent a formal warning letter to the family home. Just a routine part of the process, but it must have hit hard. Because Mom showed up at my office. Out of nowhere. Her face was streaked with tears, hair messy, like she'd rushed over in a storm of emotion. As the receptionist quietly led her into a private conference room, I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes, my coworkers trying not to stare, but clearly wondering what was going on. She didn't waste a second. "You can't just abandon us," she said, clutching that worn-out purse like it was the only thing holding her together. "The bank says if we miss one more payment, they'll start the foreclosure process." I had planned a calm, measured response. But when I looked at her, something else came out instead, something rooted in the kind of strength I hadn't let myself feel until now. "Why is this my responsibility and not Michael's?" She didn't answer right away. Just silence. But that silence spoke more truth than years of family conversations ever had. It was like I'd pulled the curtain back on this unspoken script we'd all been following. A script where I was always the one expected to save the day. For almost 2 hours we talked. Started with blame, then denial, then, slowly, something that sounded like honesty. She admitted carefully that Michael had never actually paid for anything around the house, that he'd lived there rent-free, that he'd benefited from the inheritance while I picked up the bills.
"He's just going through a tough time," she kept saying. But when I asked her to name a time when he wasn't in some kind of crisis that needed rescuing, she couldn't. I told her gently, but firmly, that I love her. But I couldn't keep doing this. Not like this. I must have repeated that line a dozen times, like a quiet chant to keep myself grounded. "I love you, but I can't keep financially supporting this anymore." The next day, Michael came out swinging. He threatened to fight me over the personal items Dad left me, things with no real monetary value, but deep emotional meaning. It wasn't even a legal threat, just a scare tactic. A way to bully me into backing down and paying again. Then the messages started pouring in. Family, friends, distant relatives, all reaching out with concern in their voices, clearly having heard some version of the story that painted me as the daughter who turned her back on her poor, grieving mother. That's when I knew Mom and Michael had gone full damage control mode, spinning their narrative to rally everyone against me. But they underestimated me. When Aunt Carol called, I didn't argue. I didn't cry or try to defend myself. I just sent her a simplified spreadsheet, just a glimpse of the years of financial support I'd given quietly, without expectation. And at the bottom, I added one sentence. "I've supported them financially for years while being completely excluded from the inheritance. I'm just asking that Michael, who now legally owns the house, finally step up and take responsibility." And with that, the silence on her end said everything. When Aunt Carol finally heard the real story, her face said it all. "Sarah, we had no idea. They told everyone you just refused to help after the funeral." That one sentence cracked open everything. Turns out, for months they'd been telling the family a twisted version of events, painting me as cold and selfish while hiding the truth about what really happened. But once Aunt Carol knew, she started sharing the facts with others who'd also been misled. And just like that, the illusion Mom and Michael had kept up for years started falling apart. Slowly, relatives began reaching out to me, some to apologize, some just to say they finally understood. And a few even confronted Mom and Michael directly, questioning the way they'd treated me. The silence that once protected them was breaking. I'll never forget the lunch that changed everything. Mom and I met at this quiet little restaurant halfway between our homes. I picked the spot intentionally, somewhere public, calm, where she couldn't cause a scene. We both knew this wasn't just lunch. It was a reckoning. After trying every guilt trip in her playbook and realizing I wasn't budging, she finally said it out loud. "We always just thought you'd take care of us. You're so good with money. Michael, he struggles." That one sentence held years of expectation. Years of me being the responsible one, the fixer. And it hit me. My capability had become their excuse. Not something to celebrate, but something to use. So I asked the question that had been burning inside me for weeks. Why did you think Michael should get everything, while I'm still expected to keep paying for everything else? Her answer? Well, he needs it more than you do. You've always been able to take care of yourself. That was the core of it. The unspoken agreement that had shaped our whole family dynamic. Because I was capable, they assumed I'd always be okay, so they gave everything to the one who wasn't. It made no sense. But that's the thing with dysfunction, it rarely does. And for the first time, I saw real tears. Not the kind meant to guilt me or sway me, but tears that came from realizing what she'd done, what they'd all done. Meanwhile, the truth about Michael was making its way through the family too. The mortgage I'd stopped paying? It wasn't the first time I'd bailed him out, just the first time I'd finally said no. And when people started connecting the dots, the picture became clear. Uncle Robert, Dad's older brother and a retired accountant, picked up the phone and called Michael himself. He'd just found out the full story, and he wasn't having it. He asked the questions no one else had dared. Why hadn't Michael handled any of his responsibilities? How could he accept the full inheritance while letting me carry the financial weight for years? That phone call marked the end of Michael's free pass. The silence that had always protected him, the excuses, the enabling, it all ended. And for the first time, he had to face something he never had before: consequences. About 2 months after I finally set that boundary, the bank moved ahead with early foreclosure warnings. And for the first time, Mom and Michael had to face the financial reality I'd been shielding them from for years. I heard through the grapevine typical family whispers that they'd put the house up for sale. It was a practical move, sure, but it hit hard. That house had history, and letting it go felt like the beginning of a long overdue reckoning with all the unhealthy patterns we'd been stuck in. Right in the middle of all this family chaos, something unexpected happened. I got a message from Martin Goldstein, my dad's old business attorney. He asked to meet privately. Said it was about some sensitive stuff concerning my father's estate. So we grabbed coffee at his downtown office, and honestly, what he shared changed everything. Turns out, my dad had made some major changes to his will in the last months of his life, when he was on heavy pain meds. Martin showed me documents from an earlier version, one that was written a couple years before Dad got sick. In that version, everything was supposed to be split equally between Michael and me. It was clear.
Fair.
What any daughter would expect, really. I left that meeting reeling. And I knew I couldn't just ignore what I'd learned. So I met with an estate lawyer to figure out if I had grounds to contest the newer will. And legally, I did. The changes were made when Dad was vulnerable and possibly being influenced. But as much as I wanted to stand up for what was right, something in me knew that fighting over it wouldn't actually fix anything. I told Thomas, my partner, something I'd never said out loud before. Even if I win the money, I still lose. It won't heal years of feeling like I was never enough. Chasing fairness in a family that never played fair just keeps me stuck. So I let it go. The house sold faster than anyone expected. The money covered the remaining mortgage and cleared some old debts. Whatever was left gave Mom just enough to move into a small 2-bedroom apartment. It was a huge downgrade from where she'd been, but also it was the consequence of decades of bad financial choices and enabling Michael at every turn. And Michael? He suddenly had to figure out adult life for real. No free ride anymore. So not long after, he announced his engagement to Vanessa, the daughter of a wealthy local businessman. Let's just say, the timing felt convenient. A lot of eyebrows went up in the family, and no one really said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. One afternoon, during one of those rare phone calls with my mom, the kind that didn't spiral into blame or guilt, she let something slip. And honestly, it caught me off guard. She said, "Your father always worried more about Michael." Her voice softened, almost like she was letting her guard down for a second. "He always said you were so capable, even as a little girl. But Michael, he needed more help."
Hearing that out loud, it hit me. I think deep down, I'd always known there were different rules for the two of us growing up. But having her actually say it, it felt like someone finally saw what I'd been carrying for years. That quiet validation meant more than I expected. It wasn't just in my head. The favoritism, the uneven expectations, it was real. With Thomas by my side, always steady, always supportive, I finally felt strong enough to set some real boundaries with my family. Nothing dramatic, just healthier. We agreed on monthly check-ins with Mom, a few holiday cards here and there, and showing up for the occasional family gathering, but only with clear time limits. And most importantly, I stepped completely away from anything financial. No more blurred lines. At first, these changes felt strange, like I was breaking some secret family rule. The guilt hit hard. The anxiety crept in. But with Dr. Marquez's help, I started to see those feelings for what they were: emotional leftovers from a childhood built on obligation, not love. Thanksgiving was my first real test. For years, I'd been the one to host. It was expected. But that year, I told Mom I wouldn't be doing it. Instead, Thomas and I accepted his parents' invite and spent the holiday with them up in Connecticut. It was cozy, peaceful, normal. Of course, right after I told Mom, the guilt messages came flooding in from her, from Michael. Old patterns trying to pull me back. But this time I didn't give in. And honestly, it was the best Thanksgiving I'd had in forever. No drama. No tension. Just a warm, happy gathering with people who respected each other's space. That experience showed me something powerful. Family doesn't have to mean self-sacrifice. Real love has boundaries. And when they're respected, connection actually feels good. A full year passed with those boundaries in place. Then came the anniversary of my dad's passing. I thought I'd be overwhelmed with grief, but surprisingly I wasn't. Instead, I felt clear, grounded. By then, I had just been promoted to partner at Wellington Barnes, a milestone I'd worked so hard for. That promotion didn't just come with a new title. It brought security. It gave Thomas and me the chance to buy our dream home, a quiet place just outside the city, where we're close to both the energy of life and the calm of nature. And maybe for the first time, it felt like I was living my life. Not the one I was expected to live. Not the one shaped by guilt or old family roles. Just mine. Our spring wedding was small, beautiful, and honestly, everything we wanted. It felt like us. The people there were our chosen family, the ones who showed up with love, not just blood ties. Even my mom, who I was a little unsure about, surprised me. She showed up with grace, stayed respectful, and even had moments of real warmth toward Thomas. It felt like the start of something new. But the real shift happened slowly, in the months after. My mom, who had spent her whole life clinging tightly to old family roles, started changing. At first, she pushed back in all the familiar ways. Guilt trips, silence, little emotional jabs. But I stayed steady. I didn't budge on the boundaries I had finally built. And over time, something in her softened. On one of our regular phone calls, she said something simple but huge. "I'm learning how to have a different kind of relationship with you." Just that. No drama. No conditions. And coming from someone who had lived in rigid family patterns for almost 70 years, that was a big deal. Then came Michael. His engagement to Vanessa, the wealthy, picture-perfect one, fell apart almost overnight. Apparently, her family found out about his financial mess and weren't okay with it. One Tuesday, completely out of the blue, he showed up at my office. He looked rough, desperate, like life had hit him hard. "I just need a little help," he said. "Just something to get me through until I figure things out." It was the same old story, wrapped in new panic. But this time I didn't fall back into the old role. I didn't yell. I didn't get emotional. I just said no calmly, clearly, and with love. What I did offer was a list of actual resources, financial counseling, and some job leads I knew were legit if he was really ready to turn things around. And the most unexpected part? My mom backed me up. When Michael tried to bring her in to sway me like he always used to, she didn't take the bait. On a three-way call he set up to guilt trip me, she simply said, "Sarah's right, Michael. We've got to figure out how to stand on our own. It's not her job to save us anymore." I couldn't believe it. For the first time ever, she stood with me in holding the boundary. That moment felt like a crack of light in our family system, proof that maybe, just maybe, healing was actually happening. She even took her own steps toward independence. She found part-time work at a little floral shop down the street. Nothing big, but it gave her a social circle and a small income. And she started doing little things on her own, like handling apartment repairs or calling the cable company, without my help. Every time we talked, I could hear something new in her voice: pride. She'd spent most of her life relying on my dad or me, so watching her begin to stand on her own, even in these small ways, felt like witnessing a new version of her being born. And me? This whole journey led me somewhere I never expected. I started a free financial literacy program at a local community center. Most of the women who come through are low income, many trying to break free from financial dependence or toxic relationships. teaching them how to manage money, build confidence, and believe in their own ability to stand on their feet? It lights something up in me. Because I get it. I've been there. And I know what it means to finally step into your own power, not just emotionally, but financially too. 6 months into my volunteer work, something happened that I never expected. My Aunt Carol passed away. It was heartbreaking, of course, but what came next truly caught me off guard. In her will, she left the majority of her estate to me. She even wrote a note with it saying, "To my niece Sarah, whose strength and integrity through life's challenges reflect the values I hold closest to my heart." Unlike what happened with my parents' estate, this gift came with no strings attached. No guilt, no manipulation, just a quiet message of love, respect, and trust. It felt like she truly saw me. Thomas and I decided to take a portion of that inheritance and do something meaningful with it. We started a scholarship fund to support young women who want to study finance. What could have become another messy chapter in the family story became something beautiful, a legacy of empowerment. But the moment that truly shook me came out of nowhere, on an ordinary Sunday phone call. My mom, who had never once truly owned up to the past, suddenly said, with a calm, thoughtful voice, "I've been thinking a lot about how unfair we were to you for so many years. We leaned on you for everything and gave Michael the easy road. I'm really sorry, Sarah." There was no blame, no guilt tripping, no expectations. Just a real apology. When I didn't even realize I was still hoping to hear. And you know what? In that moment, something inside me finally let go. Not in a way that erased the past, but in a way that made room for peace. Grieving my dad and grieving the family, I thought I was supposed to have that eventually turned into something softer. Acceptance. Not of what could have been, but of what actually was. And that shift gave me space to build real relationships, based on honesty and mutual respect, not pressure or obligation. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't mean letting old patterns back in. It means letting go of the hope that people will change into someone they've never shown you they can be. The biggest lesson? Real worth isn't about how much you can give, fix, or sacrifice for others. It's about knowing you have value just for being you. Creating a life with boundaries, respect, and emotional peace? That's the kind of wealth no one can take away from you. My journey from being the fixer to feeling truly free wasn't easy. I had to walk through guilt, doubt, and that awful fear of being too much or too cold. But once I made it through, the view was unlike anything I'd seen before. Have you ever had to draw tough lines with family too? Maybe you've had to walk away to protect your peace? If so, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this message touched something in you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more conversations about growing stronger even through the messy stuff. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no, especially when the world expects you to keep saying yes. Thanks for listening. And whatever part of your journey you're on, I'm wishing you strength, softness, and so much self-worth.